The raid began in the early hours of Monday morning. Israeli forces entered Jenin refugee camp and a fierce firefight broke out. The Israeli army described it as a massive exchange of fire. During the raid, Palestinian civilians were killed, including a 15-year-old. His father remembered him as a polite teenager.
Anytime I asked him for something, he always said yes. He was decent, polite, respectful. But his problem was that the moment the Israeli army raided, he ran towards them. He wanted to die after his friend Omar was killed. The death of his friend was very painful for him.
In a rare move, Palestinian fighters planted an improvised explosive device at the entrance to the camp. And this was a moment when the armoured Israeli vehicle drove over it. Israeli helicopter gunships then fired missiles into the camp in a bid to extract the soldiers in the vehicle. One Israeli soldier was injured. It's the first time Israel has used helicopter gunships for an attack inside the occupied West Bank in more than 20 years. Israeli forces also fired at the local hospital where the injured were to arrive and waiting journalists were gathered. The Palestinian ambulance service says its ambulances were also blocked from entering the camp. The Palestine Liberation Organization is convening a meeting with the Palestinian president and all of the factions to formulate a response to this latest attack. It's also calling for the international community to step in and try and bring a halt to these now near-nightly raids. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera, West Jerusalem.
Al Jazeera's Nida Ibrahim is in the occupied West Bank. Nida, what more can you tell us about what's happening now? What we're hearing is that the Israeli forces are withdrawing or have withdrawn.
Yes, we can confirm that Israeli forces have completely withdrawn from the Jenin refugee camp. And we can hear the sounds of Palestinians marching at the outskirts of the refugee camp. Mainly, we have 5 Palestinians who were killed in this raid, so we are expecting the funeral processions to take place now after the Israeli forces have left the refugee camp after a 10-hour raid in which we've seen a lot of injuries. We're talking about 91 Palestinians, more than 20 of them in critical conditions, including a minor. So it is a tense situation here. There's a lot of anger and frustration amongst Palestinians. They say that Israel comes in, attacks Palestinians, and gets away with it. I don't know if you can hear the sounds now.
We can, Nida. We absolutely can, and we can see very distinctly what your cameraman is showing us of people walking down the street, although I can't make out where the crowd is going. Nida, how did this begin?
So usually these crowds take the bodies of those Palestinians who were killed for their parents for a final farewell before they're laid to rest. This all started when the Israeli forces have raided the Jenin refugee camp in the early hours of the morning. Now, according to the Israeli army, the aim was to arrest 2 Palestinians they believe they were suspected of carrying out attacks. Now, what happened that is Palestinians used detonation or explosive devices that have detonated, that have affected and injured soldiers, as well as damaging armored vehicles. This is something that was alarming to the Israelis. It took them an hour to take the soldiers and evacuate them to the hospital. It took them 1 hour to do so and hours to take the vehicles out. So it was definitely an unusual scene here.
Something that's pretty notable for all of us who, look at this regularly, especially for you who covers these raids in the West Bank very regularly, is the weapons that were used on both sides, frankly. An explosive device that was set by Palestinian militants, as I understand it, and then helicopters on the Israeli side firing rockets into a refugee camp. Was all that and the level of firepower surprising to you, Nida?
Well, the fact that they've used the explosions and the bombs from helicopters, this is something we haven't seen in nearly 20 years. Here in Jenin, it was a scene of a battle in 2002 during what's known here as the Second Palestinian Intifada, where Israel used choppers to drop bombs on Palestinians. So that was definitely an unusual scene. Now, as to explosive devices, Palestinians use that often here in Jenin. basically to kind of prevent the Israeli forces from entering the camp. But it was interesting the fact that they were able to obstruct the work of 5 vehicles and injure those inside them. So as far as Palestinians here are concerned, they're considering this a success for the Palestinian resistance. And this is kind of why Israel has escalated what is used to, or what could have been a regular arrest raid, to a 10-hour gun battle.
Nida, Ibrahim reporting from Jenin in the occupied West Bank. Thank you to you and your team for your reporting. Jenin has been at the heart of Palestinian resistance against the illegal occupation by Israel. After the 1967 war, the city in the northern West Bank came under Israel's control. An estimated 14,000 Palestinians live in the Jenin refugee camp. You just saw what it looked like there. During the Second Intifada, Israel waged a 10-day military campaign by air and land to crush a Palestinian uprising in that camp. Nearly 60 Palestinians were killed. The camp now has one of the highest rates of unemployment and poverty in the occupied West Bank. Palestinian armed resistance there is increasing as Israel denies freedom of movement and continues to raid the camp. Let's bring in Nibal Farsak on this. She is Media and Communication Officer at the Palestine Red Crescent. She joins us today from Ramallah. Thanks for being on the show. Share with us, if you will, what happened from your perspective, how you first became aware of the raid, and then what your team saw when they arrived.
Yes, it was such a very hard day for all Palestinians and for our medical teams who work on the ground to save lives of Palestinian people. Israeli occupation forces attacked 4 PRCS ambulances during their conducting duty in Jenin. They were directly targeted with live ammunition, causing material damage to the structure and the glass of the ambulances themselves. One of the ambulances was also hit by a military vehicle before it was shot by the occupation forces, causing damage to the ambulance, and it was taken out of service due to the attack. Our medical teams were denied access.
Can I jump in there for just a second? I want to make sure I heard you crystal clear. You say the ambulances of the Red Crescent were deliberately targeted. Is that right?
Yes, this is right. 4 ambulances were directly targeted by gunshots during conducting duties in Jenin. One of our ambulances was also hit by a military vehicle and went out of service due to the attack. At the same time, our medical teams were denied access and delayed access to the wounded and injured people who they're in a very severe conditions, need for our urgent help and urgent medical services. Also, one of the ambulances was threatened by the Israeli soldiers, and the EMTs who were in the ambulance were taken out of the ambulance and arrested for a while from the Israeli soldiers who, stopped them from conducting their duties. At the same time, the numbers of injuries were so much high. Our team could only deal with around 43 injuries. This is from early morning, 4:45 in the morning till 3 p.m. We dealt with around, as I mentioned, 43 injuries, and evacuated 2 murders, including 27 gunshot wounds and 8 shrapnel wounds. Most of the injuries, as you mentioned, it was dangerous because it was targeted toward the upper parts of the body.
Nibal, when you say that your teams were denied access to people who needed treatment, you described a little bit what that looks like. But then you also said that at some point you were able to access the injured. So what does that look like? At some point, Israeli soldiers allowed the Red Crescent ambulances to move forward. Is that right?
Yes, because in some cases there was a totally, delay of access. In others, as I mentioned, like one of our ambulances were stopped and EMTs were threatened by Israeli soldiers with their guns. They threatened the EMTs and stopped, let them take out the EMTs from the ambulance and stop them from conducting their duties. There was a great delay and stopping of our medical teams from providing the medical services for the injuries, but we were able finally to arrive some injuries. That's why we only succeeded in arriving 43 injuries. That's the one that the PRCS medical teams were able to deal with. However, other injuries might be transferred by private vehicles who were able to transfer the injuries. But the total number of injuries where we are able to provide medical services were around 43 injuries. And we at the PRCS views this with a very great concern because these repeated violations stopped our medical teams from conducting their medical duties in the ground. And this is against the international humanitarian law, which emphasized the rules and norm and prohibited the endangering the lives of medical teams.
Nibal, thank you for joining us on the program today as we try and get more detail and shed some light on what happened today in Jenin. Nibal Farsak of the Palestine Red Crescent, thank you.